not one, not two, but three Buckeyes returning for the 2024 season. Not one, but two live versions of Snap Judgments brought to you by Buyers Auto. That is Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. Donovan Jackson, back. Jordan Hancock, back. Been a pretty good Wednesday for the Buckeyes, Bill.
Yeah, not bad. Not bad. You get a guy back who was first team All Big Ten and a guy who should have been in Jordan Hancock, but for some reason wasn't voted to any of the All Big Ten list.
Not one, not
Yeah.
two, not three, not honorable mention. What are we doing there?
He's coming back to right that wrong, which I greatly appreciate about Jordan.
Berm, good vibes?
You know, these are the types of vibes that people are looking for when you're talking about vibes. It's not really like a surprise. I mean, again, once Jack Sawyer and Tyreek Williams and Denzel Burke and all these guys came out to talk in mid-December and basically laid out the plan for this return, I think this should all have been somewhat assumed, but for whatever reason, they've staggered the announcements, and you didn't know if the Cotton Bowl had played any role. Obviously, NIL still plays a role in this, as a few of these guys are figuring out exactly what it takes to get themselves back on the roster for 2024. But this idea of legacy, this idea of unfinished business did not come from nowhere, and it's not just lip service either. These guys feel like they have obviously not done what they set out to do. There have been 3 straight years of missed goals, and they just simply don't feel like they want to leave Columbus without at least accomplishing one of them. So time to go. And it's huge for Jordan Hancock. We talked at length about it on the Denzel Burke version of Snap Judgments, but this defense now is heading into 2024 as the best defense in the country, regardless of what JT Tuimoloau does, in my opinion. And then you add Donovan Jackson, who had his ups and downs again in 2023, but it's a third-year starter on the offensive line, and that is something where you now have an answer, maybe just one to figure out on the offensive line. That's what you do at right tackle, but you can't look at either one of these decisions and think anything other than that's really great news for Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Hancock, the way he played in the second half of the season at nickel really made this a much harder conversation and more difficult decision for him than I think any of us, maybe outside of you, Berm, would have projected in the offseason. But it was still an unknown. And he even went into September where he was rotating in at corner. He was rotating some with Sonny Styles at nickel. And then it became a necessity late in the year, partly because of the way Jordan Hancock was playing in that role where he has to be on the field and he was built to play that position. And it's a similar conversation with Denzel Burke. Could they have figured out a way to replace him with some of the talent that they have in the secondary in 2024? Of course they could. But if the option is somebody new or somebody who's now had a year or half of a season to make that position his own and be a physical presence against the run, show that he can defend in coverage against the pass, and also absorb some of that leadership as someone who's going to be in his 4th year in the program, that's the option you want. So that's a huge deal. And I think the uncertain part, Bill, is when we talked about the complication of how well he was playing and becoming an NFL player was how extensive was the body of work coming off the injury as a sophomore and the hamstring that really lingered all year. And what did that mean for how early he could get drafted? He has an opportunity to now do this for another year and be vaulted into maybe, if not a first round spot, at least a second.
Yeah, I asked him about that when we talked to the guys here in Columbus in the middle of December. Like, did he think 1 year was enough? And he said yes. He said, I'm not worried about the experience. I'm more concerned about coming back for another year and like leaving a legacy in this class, the 2021 recruiting class, leaving more of a mark than they would have left if they all decided to go after this year. But I do think the experience piece is important. Like, Jordan certainly would have been drafted this year and perhaps even would have been a day 2 pick. I think that position is a premium position and increasingly so in the NFL when you can play the nickel and sort of not have to come off the field, whether it's a rundown or a pass down, while providing corner-like coverage for your defense, I think is incredibly valuable. That's what Jordan did for Ohio State this year. But it's a position that I do think carries probably more first-round value than it did a couple of years ago. And if you're Jordan Hancock and saw how well you played last year, frankly, in a spot that he wasn't expecting to play in. He said like it was kind of something on the fly that he had to learn and figure out and get comfortable with. Even if, to our eye, it looked like he was pretty comfortable from the start. He said there was a little bit of a build-up process there. Now he has the whole year. He'll get another year, and we'll see what that looks like. Maybe they'll give him some more work outside or move him around a little more than they did this past season. But I definitely think he's got a first round ceiling when you combine just sort of his natural athletic gifts, his football IQ, and the fact that he plays a really important position in like today's football.
Yeah, we talked about. Sorry, I was going to tee you up for this. We talked to him coming off the field at Rutgers for the Notebook, and it had jogged my memory that, well, he used to be talked about for that bullet. So Bill's talking about that he had to learn this position, but this was sort of what Ohio State always envisioned him growing into.
Yeah, he was the number one player on their board defensively and the defensive backfield in the class of 2021. And I think what's interesting, if you look at Jordan, we go back to 2019, right, and how valuable Shaun Wade was in that slot. And then he returned in 2020 with one goal in mind, and that was to play more outside and prove that he could be an outside corner in the NFL. And it didn't really work out for Shaun. And I don't think Jordan has that thought process. His thought process is, I'm going to play corner, and I'm going to play wherever they put me. If it means some outside work, and maybe they move those guys around a little bit, as you said, Bill, maybe they flip-flop Denzel or Jordan and Davis Nigmanosin or what you have with Jermaine Matthews. You got a lot of options there with your top four corners. But the beauty of what this really does for Ohio State, because you lost Ryan Turner, you lost Jair Brown to the transfer portal, is it allows Aaron Scott and Miles Lockhart and Bryce West, these younger guys who maybe were going to be forced into some action that eventually they'll be ready for, but probably not early in the season in the slot. I think now you can really teach them how to do this in the right way. And I think that Jordan can serve as an example, not just for the younger guys, but also for Igbinosun, also for Jermaine Matthews. Also even for Denzel Burke, who are maybe more traditional outside guys. But if you want to make it to the next level and stay in the NFL for a while, you're going to need to learn how to play in and out. So Jordan Hancock's skill set when they recruited him was all outside corner, but his physicality, the way he plays the run, like that is a kid who sets the example for exactly what you want out of that defensive back position, that cornerback position. It doesn't matter in or out. That dude's a player no matter where you line him up.
It's kind of wild to think that even in August, just lining them up with their raw physical, even fine-tuned athletic ability in some of these cases with Denzel or Lathan Ransom, that entire secondary, then as good as they played, so August, then September, October, and November, and finish number 2 in total defense or number 3 in scoring defense, however those were, if I've got them backwards, that the only player in the Ohio State secondary they would have to replace is Josh Proctor. Like, I don't think you could have paid me enough money to convince me of that before the season started.
Yeah, and they were number 2 in passing efficiency defense, if you want to give more of a tip of a cap to the way the secondary played. It's pretty crazy. I sent that out to our text subscribers because I hadn't really hit me until I typed it out that of their 6 main secondary contributors, 5 of them are back if you include Sonny Styles in that mix. Now, I think that creates some questions, right, of what this looks like moving forward, because I don't know that either Jordan Hancock or Sonny Styles would want to split a job again next year. And I don't know if that's in the best interest of Ohio State if it's trying to get its best 11 defenders on the field more often than not. So they'll have to figure that out. And they don't have to have that figured out on January 10th. But Jordan Hancock returning, I do think maybe gets the ball in motion a little bit here with a potential move for Sonny Styles, which we talked about to linebacker, like just making sure all your kind of long, rangy, freaky, athletic dudes are on the field at the same time. I think you got to move some guys around to do that. But the best version of that included Jordan Hancock playing the nickel position, because I don't think, like to Burnham's point, like you can move guys around and it's good, I think, to find ways to develop that kind of versatility. But I don't know that I look at the roster and think to myself, like, oh yeah, that guy can also do what Jordan Hancock does. I do think Jordan Hancock's a little unique on this roster. In a room full of very talented secondary players, he's a little unique.
Yeah, the traditional inside corner is that 5'11" guy. Jordan Hancock's almost 6'2" and has no problem coming up and playing the run. That's where Bryce West at 5'11" and Miles Lockhart at 5'11", are going to have to figure out, which parts of that game are you emulating. I think if you look at what Ohio State has to do secondary wise now, like it's pretty obvious what has to happen to get to what you're saying, Bill. I mean, there's no returning safeties coach now, and so you don't have that argument, I guess, that maybe you would have had or that you have had in the last year about, hey, we need to keep Sonny Styles at this position. Now you bring in McAvery and say, look, here are your safeties. Sonny Styles is not one of them. and then say, figure it out. Good luck.
McAvery does already know what Sonny Styles can do, and I bet that he shares a common viewpoint with Jim Knowles.
Yeah.
I bet he's going to lose that argument.
I'm saying that they all want him to play linebacker.
Yes, then I'm going to lose the argument that I just mentioned about the
That's who's going to lose it.
Donovan Jackson, huh? How about that? Returning to Ohio.
How about that?
Hey, do you guys think the side profile of Donovan Jackson looks like George Washington?
Yes.
I want to take a picture of it one day.
I've said before, I think he could be president one day.
Yeah.
Well, he's getting a lot of George Washingtons to come back, I think.
I would imagine so. Yeah.
Take us into the trenches, Bill. What's this one mean?
I think it's really good that Donovan Jackson and Josh Simmons will now have like a full off season to like continue to sort of figure each other out. I think, like as Berm said earlier here, like Donovan Jackson probably has been a little up and down in his career. I think it's a fair way to put it. I would say that was true of both guard spots this year with he and Matthew Jones, and maybe neither one of them were quite as good as we were hoping they would be. But I think I said this when we talked about Seth McLaughlin. I think we don't at times pay enough attention to just the impact of having to play with new people and how that can maybe cause even a veteran's play to suffer a little bit. So I think Donovan's improved throughout his career. And now that he's going to have that left tackle next to him, that he's got a full season of work with, and now he'll get this winter and he'll get the spring. And obviously the build up to the 2024 season. I think it's going to be really good for both Donovan Jackson and Josh Simmons. And I know like we assume that Seth McLaughlin will be the center, and that's a new person to play next to, but at the very least that guy's experience. So you would hope that learning curve is not quite as difficult as it was perhaps to play with a very green center like Carson Hinsman was. So Donovan's got all the talent in the world, right? I think he's a pretty good pass protector. I believe he's only given up 3 sacks in his 2 years as a starter. For me, he's got to get a little more consistent and powerful, I think, as a run blocker. But I still think he's a guy that has a pretty high ceiling as an interior offensive lineman. I don't know. He's not really come close to it yet, I don't think, at least not what my expectations were. But for him to come back now for a 4th year to keep chasing that, I think is nothing but good news for Ohio State.
He was a top 10 player in the country in the class of 2021 when he came out of high school, and he played all tackle in high school, didn't play on the inside, struggled a little bit with the transition to guard. But that's obviously what his body is built for, and no one really argues it. I think the interesting thing heading into this season is, as you mentioned, Seth McLaughlin, how that changes things, because we don't know how much a green center hurts the guard play, but it also was 2 tackles that had never played together. And I think the biggest question for Ohio State now is, what do you do with the rest of the offensive line? You have ostensibly 4 starters returning. So how do you position them? How do you play them? And I think that the question about whether or not Carson Hinsman moves to guard, or if it's Luke Montgomery or Tegra Shabola, or if you move Josh Fryer back to guard and you put Luke Montgomery at right tackle, which I think is a real possibility. Like, there's a lot of options here for Ohio State, and the offensive line, which was obviously abysmal against Missouri, was not like bad all year long. They got significantly better from October to the end of November. Anyone who watched Ohio State versus Michigan and Alabama versus Michigan should appreciate that the Ohio State offensive line was actually improving quite a bit towards the end of the season. And I think you are okay if you keep Josh Fryer at right tackle, just because you now have the experience of all these guys returning together. And as he continues to grow into that position, Josh was not playing tackle in the first 2 years of his Ohio State career either. So I think that it really sets up the line nicely for an offense that's going to look a lot different with Will Howard and Quinshon Judkins and Will Keck-Merrick and maybe Travion Henderson returning. Like, there's a lot to build on there.
It's a little bit of the the way of the world for offensive linemen that you know, or me, I guess specifically, you form these judgments that are based off of their worst snaps and not their best. But I've talked with Donovan about this a few times, and like, you know, the blown assignment, you know, on the stunt 2 years ago against Iowa that led to the CJ Stroud, you know, sack and forced fumble and a touchdown for the Hawkeyes, and then the amount of times that he rewatched the final snap in the game at the Big House and winding up on his back as Kyle McCord gets hit, and it looks like Marvin Harrison Jr. is breaking free for what could have been the game-winning touchdown. And he said he had to, you know, be pulled out of the room because he spent 2-3 days just thinking about it and what could have been done differently, how much of it was on him, tripping feet with Carson Hinsman. Like, you know, it happened. And that doesn't mean, like, Donovan Jackson has a first-team All Big Ten award. A lot of coaches and a lot of other people who watch this team recognize that there's more good snaps than bad. But I think that is probably the next step, because if an NFL talent evaluator is looking at the same thing, it's like, how can we eliminate these 2 or 3 or 4 plays from your game and get you to the next step? And that comes with time and experience. And Donovan was relatively pressed into that lineup quickly. He always looked physically capable of doing it, but you know, you grow and get better, and he's got a huge body of work to draw from. But it is still taking that next step. And maybe it is as simple as having familiarity with Josh Simmons on his left or a veteran center on his right. We'll see. But, you know, he was in some spots where he clearly had some room to grow. I think that should be exciting for Ohio State. I mean, it's better than the alternative, which is replacing both of your guards.
Yeah. And it gives you now time to continue to develop like Austin Saraveld and Josh Padilla, and I guess like I would put Tegra Shabola in there too, although I think Tegra's got a decent shot of competing for a starting job next year. But you were either going to have to go, you actually probably were going to have to go into the portal again if Donovan Jackson didn't come back, or be forced to probably play a guy who wasn't ready yet. And we saw what that looked like last year when they had to play a center who wasn't ready yet. So you didn't want to be entertaining that notion yet again for Ohio State. So, and I don't think, like, I know we're talking a lot about 30-year guys who are, 2021 class guys who are coming back for now a 4th year, and the expectation when you're a 5-star is to be 3 years and done. That's less of an expectation for me when you're an offensive lineman. So like, I don't even know that Donovan's necessarily behind. I think there are 5-star offensive linemen who certainly go 3 and done, but for a guy to come back for a 4th year to continue to refine some stuff and enhance his draft stock and acknowledge that he's not yet like an NFL ready-made product necessarily, I don't think is out of the ordinary. So I hope people don't look at like Donovan Jackson's track record and think that it's an indictment on offensive line development necessarily, because I just think that's more normalized for offensive linemen. It just takes a little longer.
Yeah, think about how much different Matt Jones and Donovan Jackson would have looked this year with Luke Whippler as their center. And I think that Donovan is smart enough to understand that he's probably, I've seen him ranked as somewhere between the 7th and 9th offensive guard in the NFL draft prospects. And if you're a top 3-round pick, then that pretty much guarantees you're going to be on an NFL roster next year. If you're being picked in the 4th or 5th round as an offensive lineman, there's no guarantee you're going to be on a roster. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to take that shot if you're not 100% convinced that you're going to be picked in that first 3 rounds. And so for Donovan, it feels like a no-brainer for a lot of reasons, but there are a lot of young players who were highly ranked coming out of high school that have the egos and the expectation that I'm 3 and out no matter what. And sometimes that leads to a lot of regret. And I don't think he's going to have any with this decision.
Yeah. Two mature decisions and 2 good decisions for Ohio State on a busy Wednesday, full of them for the Ohio State Buckeyes. This offseason really ramping up, and we're going to break it down as we always do on Snap Judgments. They're brought to you by Buyers Auto. Thanks for joining us for the second time for a live version to talk about Donovan Jackson and Jordan Hancock making their NFL draft decisions, which is that they're not going to the draft. They're coming back to the Buckeyes. That's Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham. I'm Austin Ward. Thanks again. We'll talk to you tomorrow for the Podcast Daily.